Welcome to the Healthcare Revolution podcast, where we empower you to take control of you and your family's health, create a community of trust in good healthcare, and achieve lasting wellness. I'm your host, Brad Powell, Doctor of Physical Therapy and owner of an award-winning physical therapy clinic here in the Salt Lake Valley. Each episode, we dive into all things rehab, injury prevention, overall health, and bring you expert insights from leaders across various healthcare fields. Please note, while we strive to provide you with the best knowledge and advice, the opinions shared on this podcast represent those of the professionals, and we encourage you to seek out medical advice if you need it. Today, we have with me Bryan Wright, who is a really good friend, and he is the CEO of Wright Physical Therapy. He's created such an amazing physical therapy company, and he's also the CEO of a group called Pilot North Group. And it's a business group that it encourages and collapses time for young entrepreneurs like myself. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's good to be here with you, Brad, and I concur. You're a great friend.
Thanks.
Thanks for calling me a good friend.
Yeah. You know, I named one of my kids after Bryan, and
is he the most naughty one?
I haven't regretted it. So headstrong. How about that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like this kid.
Yeah, he's a handful. That's for sure. So he's doing
I think
it
I've
well
seen some
for you.
videos of him wrestling with your older boys.
Yes, he dominates.
Or your older boy.
He
Yeah.
dominates for sure.
All right. Yeah.
But we're excited to talk about the patient experience. You know, what it comes back down to is some history here. I was a PT student sitting in class, and Bryan came on. I was just thinking, like, how do we create such a great patient experience? So many people have been to a clinic where they just feel like they weren't seen, and they'll walk in and the receptionist says, yeah, sit down. They don't look you in the eye. There's no personability. We've kind of lost that in healthcare. Have you seen that, Bryan?
Yeah, I think from a general standpoint, growing up, I wouldn't say it was lost. I think there's always been a divide between, healthcare that delivers a true patient experience and healthcare that sort of shuffles you through. So I think there's a group of people that don't have that patient experience intentionally.
Yeah.
And then there's a group, I would say it's more rare than not, that intentionally creates a patient experience. And when you find them, you never want to let them go,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we've all been in those clinics where that wasn't intact.
Yeah.
Like that it almost shows as if they don't care and there's no intention behind any part of the patient experience.
Yeah, like you almost feel like you're in trouble for showing up there. Mm-hmm. Like the experience is,
get on the
what
scale.
What did I do wrong? I'm sick. I don't feel well, and I'm in trouble for being here.
Yeah.
Which, it happens in a lot of clinics, but I think the world is changing enough that we're seeing a definite revolution toward intentional patient experience. And those that don't, I think it's going to get increasingly hard to even attract people there.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you feel like are the key components? We're going to dive deep into this. Bryan has 21 clinics, started just all by himself, started cranking out patient visits and really delivering, fully present, very intentional experiences to every patient interaction, right? And now you have 21 clinics. How many years later?
Yeah, it's been 17 years on Valentine's Day.
That's so awesome.
We celebrate Valentine's Day in the clinics every year because it is the foundation of our entire, movement. And it's been a remarkable journey. It's hard.
Absolutely.
It's hard to believe it's been 17 years. And I don't want to be reminded that I'm that old. It just flew by.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about what are the key components to a patient experience that we should be thinking about?
I'm tempted right away to go into cliche answers, but I want to spare the listeners who, and even my own self, from the answer of you've got to care about people. And I think that the patient experience gets expanded when you can break down the components of what you yourself want. Take out patient, put in human. What is the human experience like? Right? And people are starving for connection. I think we live in a very, I don't think, I know, and anybody who lives on this earth understands that we live in a very technologically based world. You can take from what we're doing here and look down at your phone and become absent right away. And connecting is such a powerful part of health of individuals, but also psychological welfare. I would say at the core of the patient experience is the human experience. And at the core of the human experience is connection. And really, the anatomy of connection is quite simple. There's two components: taking an interest in what other people's story is, of course, loving them. Do we always like everybody who comes into a clinic? I can say that there's not always a resonance with like everybody who walks in, but can I potentially, to create consistent connections, can I both care about their story at the right level, professional level, and can I care about them at a professional level? And that's really at the heart of it. I would say if we're talking about building a foundation, it's connecting with people. And again, in a world where technology might be, in many cases, taking the place of that, people need it. In fact, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's said that the effect of disconnection for people is equivalent to smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a week.
Yeah, I've heard that statistic.
From a health perspective. And that doesn't sound good at all. And so, yeah, I think that was at the core of it.
Why do you feel like there is so much disconnect in the world, and specifically in healthcare?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, and I would love your insights when I'm done. But if you just look at a basic quadrant, like just break apart those two components, caring or not caring about someone, caring about their story or not caring about it, you've got 4 different possibilities. Of course, the connected possibility is you care about the individual, like truly want to know how they're doing, and then they have a story to tell. Now, we don't always have time in healthcare. Time is somewhat scarce to hear that story, but can they sense that you care about their story through front office, through the intake process? Can they get a sense of that connection, even if time is scarce to a degree? Now, as PTs, we have the luxury of connecting with people because we get to work with them, 2-3 times a week sometimes, and we get to work, for an hour or less, right?
Yeah.
So that's a luxury we get to have that maybe some other healthcare providers may not have the same opportunity. So what can you do for maximum impact when you're there? Understanding that that's what connection looks like is one thing. Now, what does the other 3 quadrants of disconnection look like? Well, one is you care about the individual, but you're not interested in their story. And I kind of think of myself as a young dad. I had, a few children at that stage, and they wanted my attention, and I'm diverted in so many different directions, and I don't really have time for your story right now. That creates a slight disconnect, right? And so I had to learn over time, how do you connect with a number of people who need your attention and want to tell you their story, but you don't have time? There is an art to that. Maybe we'll get to that through this podcast. And then you look at the other category, which is I don't care about you, but I care about your story. That's known as the TMZ syndrome. Like I'm writing down every little word that you're saying. I want to hear your story. It's a gossip. It's a gossip mill. Like I want to hear everything you have to say, but I really don't care about you.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, not caring about the individual and not caring about their story. You can see that you have a 3-to-1 odds that you're going to connect with somebody. You know what I mean? If you break it down to a quadrant, you've got to have those 2 ingredients in place for true connection to occur.
Yeah.
And if you think of yourself, what's cool about taking patient experience and replacing the term with human experience is we're all humans. So like, what do you want to experience when you are in a store or you are in a healthcare facility? It really is quite basic. And one rule that I provided myself at the early stage, this was the early on rule for myself, is treat every patient like I would my mother. Now, I don't know what everybody's...
Hopefully that's good.
Yeah, I know.
Just because
I don't know what everybody's relationship is with their mom. But I believe at a core for me, like that was something that tethered me to how I wanted that patient experience to go. Yeah. And then when I had new team members come in, that was the one rule I had. I didn't have a sophisticated system. So my one rule was treat everyone like you would your mother. Yeah. And so part of what shaped healthcare for me was watching my mother go through healthcare growing up. I would go visit the doctor's offices with her. And there were some doctors, and she told me the whole spiel when she got home. Like, she was perfect patient feedback for her son because I was listening to everything. So I got to see which physicians' offices were actually delivering something that she'd go home and say, that was so great. I feel so much better. And the ones where she'd go home and just start crying. And what was the difference?
Yeah.
Did they listen to her? story, and did they care about her? And you can just anyone can see that if you've been in a place before, just take on that emotion right now of any of those other 3 categories of not connecting.
Yeah.
What does that emotion feel like? Well, it's a little different for each of the 3, but the one feels really cold. The one that you want to be in and connecting feels super warm. If you break it down and say, well, there's a phone experience, there's an in-person front desk experience, there's the ancillary staff experience, and there's the clinician experience. Which one of those is okay to drop out when the patient comes in? Which one would you be okay with to drop out in order to have connection be cohesive? Mm-hmm. And I personally think not one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about, you're essentially establishing a culture. What is the collective vision of the team, and how is each individual person contributing to that ultimate vision?
Right.
And you go through those portions of the experience and say every position matters, and every single interaction matters, and it creates this positive feedback loop that it really emphasizes the importance of that decision, right? It's like, I chose Foundation Physical Therapy, or I chose Wright Physical Therapy, and every positive experience just gets added on. You're like, it reinforces the indignation within you to say, I made the right decision.
Right. Yeah, I mean, people function off of emotions. And if you don't believe me, just go look at the one kid that you named, that you named after me. A child, especially, like children, will act oftentimes out of emotion. And we are adult children even, right? Like, we act in emotion. If I'm excited about something, I will move heaven and earth to buy it. If I'm not excited, but you have a good sales pitch, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't want it. And so the way that I like to look at it is, if every patient who walks through the door puts on a white t-shirt, and I were to say, at which point would dropping out the connection, whatever that little thing can be, it doesn't have to be more than a half a minute, or even for that matter, more than a few seconds. If a person or a patient that comes through the door does not feel connection, let's just imagine that you get a mustard stain on that white shirt, or a ketchup stain, or some splotch. Let me ask you, would you be okay with that patient walking out of the clinic with a shirt that used to be vibrant white and walks out with a splotch on it? To me, that paints a very clear picture that, well, we got 3 out of the 4 parts of this patient experience right, so that's, 80%.
Good
not
enough.
bad. I would have taken that in high school, right? But when it comes to somebody who's hurting or needing healed or needing some trust in the entire system, trust goes a long way to speed up the healing process. And it goes a long way in creating a lot of excitement around people wanting to utilize that healthcare facility or space. And when you think of it with that white t-shirt, there isn't a place on that white t-shirt that makes it white if there's a splotch anywhere. Now, throw on 4 or 5 splotches, it's pretty obvious. But if you have one, it's enough to say they no longer have that. So I've always thought, like, what if the patient goes home with a purely white shirt? What are they going to say? They're like, man, I just, like when I went in, I just feel so connected. I feel like they're family. And it's a basic mechanical thing. They go away feeling like they're part of a family when they feel like they've connected.
Yeah. So I want to dive deep into the trust that you talked about. That trust is so crucial. So much of our healthcare system has broken that trust. You think about COVID and vaccines and the mistrust and the misinformation, not being clear on what's happening with healthcare. It's created so much mistrust. Patients come into our facilities with so many barriers, so many fears. They're anxious. What are some key things that our patients should be looking for to build that trust?
Right. We'll simplify the mechanics of trust with a tree, and then we'll simplify the effects of trust with a bank account. Okay, so a tree is a great metaphor for trust. At the roots, under the ground, what you don't see is the character of the tree, right? The character of the tree sits below the ground, and it's what anchors the entire tree and also feeds the nutrients to the rest of it. So what is the character and intention of a healthcare facility? That would be a part of trust, right? That's the first component. The second component is the competence. Like, can you deliver what it is I came here for, right? Which absolutely is, of course, the trunk and the fruits. So when you take the roots, which is the character, and you take the trunk and the fruits, which is the competence, Those two components are the anatomy of trust. Great book. Maybe some of the listeners have heard of before is The Speed of Trust.
Mm-hmm.
It is a classic book. It should be read by every human, could be, but in particular, healthcare providers would do well to read it, because what they really paint the picture of is this idea of a bank account, or maybe not just a bank account, but like distributions versus taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when somebody is untrusting, there's a tax system. And the book lays out a really nice, like 20% tax, 40% tax.
Yeah, it helps you essentially judge where you are with that relationship.
Yeah, and it kind of like paints out like, well, this is what it looks like in your personal life to have a 40% tax in a relationship. And this is what it looks like in a maybe a business setting or a healthcare setting for that to happen.
Yeah.
And when you have a tax, you get to fight upstream so much of the time. And so, if somebody else in a healthcare experience makes a patient jaded, it can be an uphill stream to work through for you because of their past experience. But you don't want to compound that by having a tax within your own facility, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to have dividends. So let's talk about the positive side of the result of trust. And that is a 20% dividend or a 40% dividend. What does a 40% dividend look like? It looks like somebody walking into your facility and instead of having, for lack of a better term, PTSD, instead of having this like immediate emotional response to, I don't want to be here at the dental office or the doctor's office or the PT office. I just don't want to be here. They get an emotional response that is like, I'm just excited to be here. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to be here. Every time I come, I look forward to it. That is the essence of the speed of trust. Things move so much faster. Healthcare moves faster for the individual, for the facility. And there's a resonance that just is contagious, and it just makes it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to come to work when the patients are feeling that way. So for me, I enjoy my work more when the patients feel like they enjoy coming to my clinic more too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a contagious thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
what do you feel like are some common barriers or pitfalls that healthcare workers make that can cause mistrust with patients?
Well, I think the barriers come in 1,000 different ways, but if you were to look at the core barriers, not having enough time can often, if you feel rushed. Yeah. And sometimes that's inevitable. You have a full schedule, they're rushing in.
Patient shows up late, next one patient's early.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, those barriers can happen without your even, having a control over some of that. But I think this concept of if you don't want knives to fall on you, don't throw them in the air. So structure what you can around these barriers to improve them. But like not enough time can oftentimes make a person feel disconnected and therefore lose trust. Simply enough is not having a clear intention for what we're there for. Like if I go into the healthcare setting as a doctor of physical therapy and I'm just there to create a paycheck for myself, or I'm there to deliver care, but get in, get out in the mill, that intention, it goes downstream. So a big barrier is not setting a benevolent intention or maybe just, or setting an intention, but maybe not having it be pure. So I think as a healthcare provider, you can do a lot of good with that barrier, overcoming it just by setting clear, good intention. Like I will today be making a difference in so many people's lives. Mm-hmm. And that will have a trickle effect generationally.
Rather than I'm just going to work.
I think so. Yeah. If your intention
is seeing patients today.
Yeah. Yeah. And you as a healthcare consumer myself, you feel the difference. I have a surgeon who has fixed up my mother, my father, myself, my children. And I go to him every time because he will text me, how are you doing? Now, do we all get to have that personal relationship with our healthcare providers? Not all the time. A texting relationship, that is not necessarily the key to building trust. It's a key that he uses.
Yeah. It's a connection piece.
It's a connection piece. Yeah. Yep. And so you can build in connection pieces professionally, but I heal so much faster, and so does my family, when there is a trust built in.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Some other barriers to trust would be potentially being distracted. Like I'm with you.
You're multitasking.
So in physical therapy, right? If you're in physical therapy and somebody's talking to you because they care about you, but they aren't, when they've got their hands on you, they're talking, but they're pausing their hands. Mm-hmm. And then when they pause their hands, now they're not doing the actual manual therapy. Mm-hmm. I've been on the receiving end of that in my own company and loved the individual who was treating me, but Like that causes me to lose an element of trust because you're distracted. Now, you might be distracted with something good, but you're not focused on the thing you're doing. I would say a fourth barrier to trust building is lack of competence. And lack of competence can come in many forms, but maybe it has to do with you're not getting the results that somebody wants. They're not getting better. It could come in the form of, a jab that didn't go right. Or it can come in the form of something in, let's talk in the physical therapy sense, Brad. They could come in the form of doing a treatment, but doing that treatment in a way that actually hurts somebody and not explaining that hurt may ensue as a result of pushing the boundaries a little bit. So it's not just doing the wrong kind of treatment. Sometimes it's doing the right treatment, but not having the right education.
Absolutely.
That creates a barrier.
What do you, I'm thinking about, our listeners, and a lot of them have felt as if, they had so much mistrust. They don't want to step in the system. They don't want a primary care provider anymore because they don't believe that someone has enough connection or care or trust anymore, that they've just kind of done. Now they're doing their own path and they're essentially guiding their own healthcare. What advice would you give those people to find great providers that apply this great connection you're talking about?
This is very trite advice, but it's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've all had experiences, whether it's healthcare or buying a car, where you don't want to generalize. Humans distort, delete, and generalize. And for those that have lost trust and they need help, but they're like, I can't trust. I'll give a quick example here in just a moment, but it doesn't mean that you can't find somebody to trust. And look, if we believe so wholeheartedly through a generalization that healthcare providers or whatever, car salesmen cannot be trusted, those experiences, by and large, we get what we look for. The eyes see what they look for, the ears hear what they're listening for. So I would challenge all of us, including myself, to extend a little belief in the fact that because there has been a series of situations that have led to mistrust, it does not generalize to the general public, to the general experiences. For every bad experience, there's another good one, and I would search for those. And so that's one piece of advice I would give. Yeah,
and so what I'm hearing you say is that believe that there are humans out there that care, that want to be intentional about great healthcare. Yeah. And if you believe that and you look for it, you will find it.
I believe that what we look for expands. Yeah. So what you focus on expands. So if I'm looking for more distrust, it probably will expand, and it becomes a filter of sorts. It becomes the lens through which I look through my glasses. And again, it's a bit trite to say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's true. Look, if every time I had a negative experience, I stopped there, I don't even know if I'd be alive. So there's this phrase that I read, and I was on a podcast just a couple days ago, and I used this phrase. It was a very impactful magazine cover, but I was in Amish country at the time. It was a magazine sitting on the coffee table, and it had a buggy with horses that the Amish were guiding. I don't know what it's called, driving. And the buggy was stuck in the mud, and the caption said, "Never holler whoa in a mud hole." So, and that has stayed with me indefinitely.
I love that.
It's never holler whoa in a mud hole. Like, cynicism is a very easy thing to fall into, and it's not a fun place to stay. So when, any of us have experiences where it's not savory and you get into a mud hole, whatever that is in your life, it doesn't matter if it's a consumer experience or just a human experience, stay in the mud hole. That's not the place to stop. You keep going until you get out of that mud hole. And that's usually where the gems are. That's where you find life-changing healthcare relationships.
Absolutely.
Like life-changing, where they not only care about you, but they're competent. I promised you I'd give you an example. I have a close relative who she was guided through some mistrusted relationships to get fusions of the spine. And she did. And the advice was poor advice. She didn't get the proper treatment to ramp up to surgery. She just
skip some steps.
Yeah, and the treatment she received was what we call humming in our industry, heat ultrasound massage.
Yeah.
It wasn't true physical therapy. You understand what I'm talking about, because you guys do true physical therapy inside of Foundation PT, where you're actually helping with the right kind of progressive loads and connecting with people and making huge changes in their lives. Yeah. She didn't. And I was an intern in that clinic.
So essentially she received physical therapy, but not good physical therapy.
So if she at that point, she did generalized physical therapy. That was her experience.
I did it. Check it off.
Confirmational bias. So now, if she were to hurt her back, and I've had 1,000, actually, let's say 1,000 million, which would be what, 1 trillion? Yeah. No, that's 1 billion. But I've had a very high number of experiences where people are like, I'm just afraid that I've heard horror stories about surgery. Well, first of all, that's not fair to the surgeons. Maybe they got, funneled some patients that were not necessarily the 2%. Right fit. Yeah. And then, of course, then their outcomes are maybe not what they would be, right? And so one of the biggest things I try to do on this end of the healthcare provider, not just on the consumer end, is I want to build trust by educating. Education, true education, not rhetoric. True education in, hey, 75+% of people can resolve low back pain and radiculopathy at 5-year follow-up with proper mechanical therapy. That means that you might be in a category where therapy may not help you. And if it doesn't, we can get you in the right hands and get you fixed quite quickly. Yeah. But if it does, you're in that 75%, boy, you're going to have a lot better time. That simple piece of education can bridge a lot of gaps. If my sister had gotten that, I do think she'd have a little bit different outcome at this point, because she had to fuse at multiple levels. She had failed fusions. The result for her led to quote unquote disability. Yeah. That is not me being sarcastic about that. That is me saying, however you view disability, that was a term that was ascribed to her. And she started to believe that. She failed fusions. She didn't get the proper treatment and the right PT care. And resultantly, she now has a program up here and in her heart that I'm just disabled. What does that do to a person?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
keeps them in the mud hole.
So another quick example is when people come in for FCEs, functional capacity evaluations, a lot of them have presuppositions that they are disabled. And they're getting tests to see how disabled they are. One of the core things that I try to do, just as an example,
you're essentially trying to return them back to work, right? And they have already this preconceived notion that they're disabled.
Yeah, some FCEs come through to help get them back to work. Some come through to get more disability coverage. And, sometimes in the healthcare industry, people villainize those individuals coming through for that. But, if we truly understand the story, again, connection occurs. But we also get to go, maybe they just don't know where to turn. What if instead, when they come in to get a functional capacity evaluation, instead of focusing on their disabilities and answering the question of how disabled am I, what if I flip that question just a quarter turn, or if 180? What if I were to say, yeah, we're going to look at some of those things that you are not able to do. Another really important piece of this test is we're going to look at what you have the capacity to do. And so we'll get to see some things that you're not able to do.
You're helping them see, where their eyes go, their body follows. Right?
Yeah, and I've learned not to try and change a story too fast. It's like if any of us have kids, I've got kids, I got 6 of them. Yeah. And you wake them up in the morning, you flip on the lights, it's not so good. But what if you just turn on the lights a little and then dim it up? Yeah. So when somebody's coming in and they have a paradigm of I am disabled, just as an example. Then you're not just saying, no, you're able. That doesn't work. Healthcare providers have this tool at their disposal called match, lead, and pace. Okay. Match, lead, and pace means I'm going to match the emotion, then I'm going to lead them to a positive place, and I'm going to pace them into a healing state. And that's a beautiful principle.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can use it in life, and you should. But matching, leading, and pacing to me means, okay, yes, there's some things we got to look at that you're not able to do. It's probably been a very painful process. Validation goes a long way in building trust.
Yeah. Okay.
Not over validation. The Goldilocks principle, just right. Just right. Then I can take them and lead them to a better place. Like, yeah, so now we want to look at what you're able to do. Okay, are you good with that? Sure, but I don't think I'm able to do much. Yeah, I could see why you feel that way. Why don't we see what we're able to do?
I love that so much.
That little moment together can have a fractal effect on their lives. I think of a patient right now who had bilateral carpal tunnel surgery when she came in for a disability test, an FCE test. And when she came in, we took a history. And then we did a physical examination. And upon that, started to recognize there was radiculopathy going down from the neck. And I was like, oh, how long have you had that? Oh, since before I had these issues. And where are your symptoms? Yeah, I've always had numb hands that were kind of diffuse throughout here and here.
Yeah.
And it happened to be through the radial distribution, not the median nerve. Not the median nerve, right? And I don't want to talk over anybody who doesn't necessarily know what that
Essentially, we're meaning numbness, tingling, pain sensations down your arm.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. But I started to notice, what symptoms did you have that led to the carpal tunnel surgery? And it wasn't classic carpal tunnel. So maybe we didn't go far enough up the chain. So what did we do? Well, I talked to her about what abilities she did have, that yes, indeed, there are some disabilities. But why don't we see if we can work on something that might help her neck pain go away? Just a suggestion. As we did, lo and behold, the failed carpal tunnel surgeries went away, meaning she got all of her function back. And here's what was a really cool side effect. Somebody who had been out of work for 5 years began to feel alive again, began to want to go back to work. I don't want to cry on your podcast, but it's an emotional thing. They literally gained fervor for their life. Okay, they didn't just become productive in society. That's a great side effect.
Yeah.
They began to feel alive. Pain went away. I want to work again. Went back to work. No longer a society paying disability.
And
that's the speed of trust.
At some point, you knew that the diagnosis was wrong, right? You knew
I suspected.
You suspected that it was wrong.
Yeah.
But imagine if you would have just said,
that's wrong.
That's wrong. That's wrong. The symptoms are at your neck.
Can't believe somebody did that to you. That doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't help the system at all. We're trying to help gain trust.
Yeah.
People think they'll badmouth the surgeon or badmouth the chiropractor, and they think that it's building trust in you, but ultimately it's causing distrust in that association.
Sure. Yeah. What you said, association, is so big. If there's distrust in the healthcare system and you engender more distrust by saying, I can't believe that person did that, you're not doing yourself a favor. You think you are. You think you're making yourself out to be the person who knows better. It doesn't help. I will stake a claim there. It does not help for you to badmouth another provider. Does it help to state the facts? I think so. Is it fair to say, the carpal tunnel surgery might have helped some other things? Maybe it was hard to tell because you had so many other intense symptoms. I don't want to placate. I don't want to adulate. I don't want to puff this thing up. But I do want to make space for them to be able to handle what's coming. It's not good to whack somebody upside the head with that if you want to build trust. All of our unconscious works for our good. It beats our heart. It breathes in our lungs. Sometimes it creates superhuman powers from fathers where they can catch their falling baby without even looking at it, And it's kind of a cool thing to consider, this idea that our unconscious takes things personally. So every negative thing that I put out there about somebody else as a healthcare provider, I'm taking that on myself to a degree. So I don't want to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to look for the good. I want to look for the magnificence in other people. And that does not mean not holding accountable certain things. Yeah. It just means look for the magnificence in other people in what they were trying to do. Did the surgeon really just do malpractice by doing the carpal tunnel surgery? No. Likely he saw symptoms. Likely he did a nerve conduction test. And likely it did show something. Yeah. Potentially there was a double crush syndrome where it was pinched here and pinched up here.
Yeah.
So
and you have no idea.
Let's be loyal to the best in other people. If we want to build healthcare trust, start by not bad-mouthing other people. And again, state the facts. Don't hide it or placate, but look for the magnificence in others.
Yeah, and be true to the best within them, right?
Totally.
We're supposed to work together.
Right.
That's the intention of healthcare, is a whole team. The team is the patient, all the providers, right? The research, academia. It's all of us working together as a collective team.
It's true.
I love that.
And one of the things that was really cool realization for me is we started a prevention of injury system, which that would probably put us out of a job if we were really successful at it. So how successful should you be in preventing injury? What we found is if you could be more successful in preventing preventable injury, you could really gain a lot of trust with treating unpreventable injuries, right?
Well, that's good, yeah.
So in healthcare, is it possible to expand our thinking to save consumers more money, lower the costs that come through insurances, and still really thrive if your bread and butter is to make money from healthcare? And I would say yes. Consider, as you build trust, that all it can do is yield more of the same kind of goodness in your own life, in your own healthcare practice. And so as we find ways to really give the patient what they need, you build trust in a paradoxical way, which means that it feels almost like it's not going to work that way, like preventing PT injuries or preventing injuries. It paradoxically makes you more busy, but it saves the healthcare system and it saves the patients.
Yeah.
It just works.
The reason I love talking about the human experience, the patient experience so much, I've spent my whole life in physical therapy. I've spent my whole life in healthcare, and I've experienced this mistrust. I've experienced this not people caring about my story, but is what I'm reflecting back on. What advice would I give myself? If I was to start this journey over, these patients that feel like there's mistrust, what can they do, to be a part of that medical team? What do you think?
Yeah.
What is it that the patient can do to bring to the table to create trust, to attract trust?
Certainly. Well, first of all, go read The Speed of Trust. Everybody should read it. There's 13 things that you can do to build trust that I can remember a few of them, but those 13 ways to build trust one of them is to extend trust. That's one of the 13 rules. So
the patient, what does that practically look like for the patient?
Sure.
How did they extend trust?
Well, I think that you have to have a basis for it in the first place. Like the blind trust is kind of scary, right? But if I'm a patient, and I am in some cases, I think taking my negative experiences and understanding that I can learn from them, but understanding it does not generalize to the entirety, and understanding that I can also remember good experiences I've had in different categories as well. So what I would do is focus on when I have had bad experiences, that I've also had, whatever those circumstances are, I'd focus on what those good experiences are. Because what you're doing as a patient is you're missing out on what potentially could really work for you, and you're suffering needlessly if you don't extend some trust. So what it practically looks like is a technique I call reach and withdraw, which just means, I'm not going to give you the entire book of trust, but I'll give you chapter 1 of trust. I'll give you the first few pages.
Take the first step.
And if, it really is really good, that reaching out allows me to go, okay, I'll trust a little bit more. I'll go chapter 2. And if you're in a place where you can't give full trust, then give 10%, 20%, extend that trust. And then if it is betrayed, which can happen at times, again, the damage is so minimal at that point because you didn't extend the whole book. You can recover and you can continue the journey of where you need to be. But when you focus on what it is you do want, I put a very clear focus on specifically what I want that healthcare relationship to look like. Yeah. Because it's true. What we focus on expands. This has been a theme of what we talked about. If I'm focusing on what I want that to look like, it starts to appear. I know that may seem far-fetched, but it's not. It just is what it is. Everybody that's listening to this podcast today, I want you to find as many yellow cars as you possibly can. There's this little unique bundle of nerves inside the brainstem called the reticular activating system, the RAS, and it's responsible to attune us to what we're looking for. And it can be a superpower or a super villain, depending on how you use it. So, if you're looking for yellow cars today, challenge for you, see how many you can find. You'll see more of them otherwise. And the same goes for looking for the right kind of healthcare team. Like, just get specific about what it is that you want. I want somebody who cares about my story, cares about me. It'll appear.
Yeah. I was thinking about all the different times in healthcare that I've had very positive experiences just in the minute we've been talking here. And I think about in the middle of the night, sometimes the nurses coming in just being so good to me.
Yep.
And all the times I was in the hospital, the surgeon that just sat by my side as I took my, got up at the bed, right? The PT that taught me how to walk.
Haven't you?
Again, I'm thinking about the times in our lives that we have goodness are so many, but the negative times, they're so small, but yet they seem so big, right? I might have had 3 or 4 bad interactions, but maybe 100 positive, right? But then I might think that healthcare is not that great.
Yep.
but what you focus on expands. If you focus on all of the goodness that has come, all the positive experiences that you have had, then you start to have more of an internal belief that is positive.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Brad, because one other tool that I think is useful is to create a journal of reasons to trust. Because I think it's easier to find fault than it is sometimes to find the magnificence. So create a journal of trust. If you're having a hard time trusting what it is that you're wanting to have trust in, you can reflect on that journal. Also, writing it down is helpful because you create this list of there's a lot of reasons why I should trust. Now, you and I sit down, we talk on a podcast, we start to say, what's happening with distrust in the industry. And it can actually inherently just create a distrust. But then what's cool about what you're doing, Brad, is you're turning that around. That here's the problem. We're just going to look at it briefly, but here's the solution. A journal of times where you have a reason to trust. That can be a beautiful thing because when you extend trust to others, it also invites others to trust you more. And that is very worthwhile. As a consumer, a patient, which I am, you are, other people are. Yeah. It's good to extend trust because it also invites others to do the same in you. And if we do get dividends, by the way, when we have higher trust, we get taxes when we have lower trust. I think everybody on this planet wants to see the magnificence in themselves and in other people. So look for it, write it down, and watch it expand.
So powerful.
Yeah.
We're gonna summarize everything that we've talked about here. We've talked about connection, the importance of connection, and making sure we listen to people's story. And I think that goes from the patient and the provider, right? It's a relationship there. And then also love. Do I care about this patient? I think most healthcare workers got into healthcare in the first place because they care about people, right? And we could talk all day about how that changes over time, but ultimately the connection piece is so key. We talked about trust and the steps of trust, so powerful. What do you feel we can do in healthcare and the patients included into that to really expand? What do you feel like is happening that's good? We're talking about a revolution. What is happening good right now in our industry and healthcare that is building such a great patient experience?
Yeah. So what is good is that because there is a lexicon of information people can access, yes, it has the potential to give misinformation, but it also gives people the opportunity to research and find faster than ever. And so what's cool is if you're a healthcare provider who really does have something worth sharing, it can be findable more than ever before. And people who want that in their lives can find it faster than ever and right at your doorstep sometimes, where maybe before the word of mouth and the ability to hear about it was more obscure. So a really cool thing about the revolution going on in technology, and it comes with its downside too, but the positive is you can find that there are solutions that maybe you hadn't considered before. And you can see all the reviews. I remember the days when I would go to Blockbuster. Then I would walk up there and I would go okay, here's a movie here. And Siskel and Ebert said it was 2 thumbs up or 1 thumb up or, 2 thumbs down. Yes, that does age me. But that was kind of like you were 2 critics told you. They held the information to whether it was good or bad. Well, now you go to look at a movie, you get Rotten Tomatoes, you get, different critics talking about things. You get a kind of a nice way to look at, is this something that I want to see? When I go into your website at foundationptutah.com, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Hey, I got it.
Well done.
I get to that and I look at all the reviews, the thousands of reviews. These are people who are experiencing trust in your facility.
Yeah.
It makes it so much easier to gain trust because I'm like, there are thousands of people, real people, that are saying this was like home. I got so much better. It changed my life. And that's a pretty cool thing that can help you bridge the gap and collapse time to what you need and where you need to go.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
So in kind of closing here, you've had 21 clinics, right? You've built such an amazing organization. I did an internship there, business intern, and I was a PT as well, right? And it was amazing. I have never walked into facilities that were aligned. I went from clinic to clinic looking at how they were aligned.
Oh, I'm glad you're asking this.
And I was so amazed by your ability to replicate exactly what you're talking about. How did you do that? Give us some implications of that.
Okay. Listen closely. Simply. I will. It's actually a very simple answer. Listen closely. It has to do with a fanatical obsession over who we select to be on our team. And the same thing applies. Like if all I'm looking for is that, or not, maybe not all, but if I am looking for, gosh, people have just gotten so lazy and they're just bad workers and nobody seems to care anymore, I'm going to get more of those people applying. I was interested in who is going to make connections. So we hire our healthcare team fanatically. We'll say no to 10 to say yes to 1. And that's very important because then the resonance inside of those clinics is a high morale. That frequency is a high frequency. It's a healing frequency. And it's consistent because everybody's aligned with the purpose. So we hire based on will over skill first. That doesn't mean that skill doesn't matter.
So you're not just looking at the resume and saying, man, they've done 300 things that makes them qualified to be on my team.
And whenever I've seen discord from one clinic to another, it was because we settled for somebody who, we thought through, we maybe overthought, we put them in a position to be in the clinic because they're a good person. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for us just to hire good people. They have to be resonant with your purpose because in the end, if you want consistency, you're going to have people who want to do the thing that you are saying that's what our mission is.
Yeah.
If you believe that you can't get that person, so you settle for somebody who doesn't resonate, then what you end up doing is you compromise the consistency. It's that simple. So on your healthcare teams, if you have a vision and a mission and values, will over skill. I want to shake somebody's hand, and by and large, that tells me about 90% of the interview.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Because for me, at least, when I shake somebody's hand, I can feel what they're about. And that's just my experience because I've interviewed thousands of people now. I can really discern it much faster.
For sure.
It's not the end all be all. But if I don't feel good, if I don't feel like I want to have a conversation with somebody in that interview process, then I tend to back out of that, and I will still be very grateful that they spent their time with me and thank them. But I don't want to be in an employee-employer relationship that way because we have 21 clinics. The only way to deliver consistent care, it can't be that I'm at every clinic going, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? We have to hire and say, do you care about what we care about? Yes, we do. Okay, how do we know that? Well, there's different ways to do that, but we're not going to settle for somebody who is in discord with that.
Yeah, I love that.
That's how it is.
And I love seeing that alignment between clinics. I mean, we have these big organizations here in Utah, especially, that a lot of that human touch is lost along the way as they scale or they expand, that human touch, but it's so incredible. I mean, you should just be so proud of your clinics because Thanks. I just love seeing that alignment, that consistency, and that patient human experience not get diluted over time. It's so incredible.
Well,
so kudos to you.
It's a labor of love, brother.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any last advice, for healthcare workers or for our followers that maybe have had mistrust or don't feel connected? Any last advice for them?
The one thing that comes to my mind right now is that the patient experience is the entirety of the organism. Just like us as humans wouldn't want to have a good heart, but not the other organs working. We function best in our whole bodies when our heart, our brains, our hormones, our blood vessels are aligned. Everything's working well and in check. And the patient experience is the entirety of the heart, the brains, the arms, the legs. And when we understand that they all have to work in symphony, and you pay attention to what that is like and it matters, then it starts to make everybody function better. Everybody. A true patient experience in our model of what we would call evidence-based medicine is high-skilled treatment. Like it's the expert. It's the expert's knowledge or lexicon of what they know. It's their expert advice. It's empirical data, the stuff that you read from the journals that says this is good, this is not so good, this is useful, this is not so useful. And then it's the patient's personal preference. And so critical. So when you balance that, you balance patient preference with expert advice with empirical data, you can build trust that way too. And so it's worthwhile. It's worth everything. And things move much, much better when you put the time and energy into connecting and into the whole experience.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you for your insights. We got really deep into the human experience. What is it we all want?
Yep.
We want connection ultimately, and that's what it's really all about. Yeah. So thank you for joining us today, bringing your knowledge onto the podcast. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Brett.